Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about the book When Dimple Met Rishi by Sandhya Menon. If you've been around on my channel for any length of time, you may actually recognize that I have reviewed When Dimple Met Rishi before. It was one of the first book reviews that I had on my channel, and let's be real, the video just wasn't that great. So upon reading it for a second time, I thought I would readdress some of my thoughts about the book. And while talking about that original review, I would like to say a huge apology to anybody that I may have offended by misproperly pronouncing Rishi. It was absolutely not my intention to make an oversight of the culture or anything like that, but we're here now. I've grown, I've learned. Again, I am so sorry to anybody who may have been upset or bothered by that. That is absolutely my bad, and I should have looked it up before filming that review. But with that being said, let's go ahead and discuss the book. So the book does follow two different viewpoints, one of Rishi Patel and one of Dimple Shah. Both characters are of Indian descent, but both of them fall under two very different sides of the spectrum of coming from immigrant families. We have Dimple, who has just graduated high school and is very much wanting to be her own independent person without feeling the pressure or obligation to fall under all of the traditional family ideals. And Rishi is very much the opposite, where he is very much into upholding the traditions and culture, even more so than anybody he's ever encountered, especially those who are his own age. One of those traditions being the idea of arranged or somewhat arranged marriages, not like in a forceful way, but it is very much part of the Indian culture to have their families kind of pre-approve potential partners and marriages and stuff like that. Dimple is very much not a fan of this idea and wants nothing to do with it, whereas Rishi very much wants that life for himself and wants to find, you know, this perfect match that his family has for them. Dimple's passion in life is computer coding, and she has this dream of going to an event called Insomniacon. It's like an app coding competition, and like it is Dimple's absolute dream to be able to attend, and she's very hesitant to bring it up to her parents because she doesn't think that her parents are going to approve of it. Plus she doesn't want to ask for the money to be able to go because they aren't that well off, etc. But to her absolute surprise, they are actually very enthusiastic about it and give her the okay to go, unbeknownst to her, because they have somewhat of an arrangement with a set of family friends of theirs who have their son Rishi. And they have this like preemptive kind of arrangement that they like may possibly be an arranged marriage at some point in the future. Dimple has no idea of this, whereas Rishi is very well aware of this and is very excited to meet Dimple and start their relationship and be able to start the rest of their lives together. So they send Rishi to the Insomniacon event as well, so they are able to meet and interact for the first time and have that first attempt at a meet cute, but that is absolutely not how it goes, because obviously Rishi knows exactly who Dimple is and assumes that she knows who he is, and she very much does not. So their first meeting goes terribly, and they kind of come to the tentative agreement with each of their parents that they're just kind of gonna like leave it be. They're both going to attend Insomniacon, but they're not gonna like force any interactions and kind of just keep it at that until they are partnered for the project. So now they are forced to interact with each other daily for the 6-week summer program, and the book follows the two of them trying to navigate this forced companionship that they have, and follows them as they develop this tentative friendship and potential at having a future relationship. So as for some of my thoughts about the book itself, I am not going to lie, I actually really enjoy this book. Overall, I do think it is actually incredibly cute. I think that it does a good job at showing the developing relationship between Dimple and Rishi without it feeling forced or like it's based on nothing, which is very, very common within the young adult book world. You know, one of the biggest tropes that I find the biggest issue with is the whole insta-love thing, where they just try and convince you that these two people are like into each other or in love with each other when there's absolutely nothing to base it off of. And this is very much the opposite. I don't feel like it is forced or expected in any way. You actually get to see the relationship between the two of them grow and change as they spend 6 weeks interacting with each other. And more or less, it's actually like very, very cute and somewhat romantic without being too terribly over the top either, which I feel like is another unfortunate trope that a lot of YA tends to fall into. Like, it's either, you know, like they're forced together and like you're told that they're supposed to be in love without having any basis for that, or like you do understand why they're in love, but it's based on a whole bunch of unrealistic things that like would never happen or are just way too over dramatic or just too extra. And this definitely very nicely falls in the middle. You get to see the development, but there are, you know, enough scenarios where it feels realistic, but also fun and whimsical and, you know, cute and romantic and enjoyable to read. I was very much fascinated by the extent of the involvement of Indian and Hindu culture in the book, because that is something that I just as a person am not particularly familiar with in real life. So it was really, really fun reading a book that so deeply and heavily involves another culture, but without feeling alienating at the same time. You know, like I didn't feel like an outsider reading the book. I do think that it would be really, really fun for people who are of Indian descent or who are interested in the Hindu culture to read as well, because it may be more comforting being able to see, you know, that kind of representation. Because I feel like you generally, at least in my own personal reading experience or just media experience in general, I feel like I don't happen to see a lot of Indian representation. So it's really, really nice to get that in what feels, and again, because I'm not of Indian descent, I can't fully make these judgments, but to me it feels very authentic without stereotyping. That maybe sounds like a little bit of a contradiction because the whole concept of the arranged marriage thing does feel very much like a negative stereotype and connotation, but it is handled really, really well in the book and is very much not presented as being this terrible thing. And it's definitely like not forced in any way. They don't actually have any proper plans or arrangements or like requirements to marry each other. It was just the type of thing where the parents were like, hey, this could be a really good match. Like, let's kind of try and encourage and see how that goes. Like, yeah, there's definitely that bit of familial obligation and pressure behind it, but it's not like it's something that they're forced into. And I think that that's a very, very important distinction in being able to enjoy the story, you know, and it also enables the story to be able to explore the concepts of familial pressure. And like in Dimple's case, she feels so much obligation and pressure from her parents to be something that she's not, so that she's constantly like fighting against it, it feels like, and has a very, very huge disconnect between, you know, the tradition and not necessarily her culture, but certain things that she feels are tied into the culture. And then on the flip side of that, on Rishi's side, we get to see, you know, the feeling of familial obligation, but being into it and being interested in fulfilling those traditions and being a part of the culture so deeply. And the book also discusses the topic of parental expectations, and again, how Dimple is not willing to compromise herself to meet her parents' expectations, and therefore sometimes feels like a little bit of a disappointment. And then there's Rishi, who ends up compromising himself and his own interests and ideals in order to be the perfect son in his parents' eyes. So I thought that it was a really fun concept, also being able to see like two extremes of the same concept of having the parental expectations, but whether you meet them or you don't. Like pretty much overall, I really, really liked the two alternating viewpoints and the extremes that they were at, but still being within, like still having the same cultural background. It also discusses the concepts of, you know, class struggles, ethnicity and culture struggles, showing, you know, differences in, you know, like wealth backgrounds. You know, Rishi and some of the other members of Insomniacon come from very, very wealthy backgrounds, and it even shows within like the wealthy backgrounds, you know, that we have Rishi, who is very, very classy and humble, whereas some of the other characters are very much arrogant pricks, to be honest. So it shows that, whereas some of the other characters like Dimple come from much more like financially modest backgrounds. And so it shows her, you know, being more worried about and concerned about finances and money and that kind of thing. That's something that I actually very greatly relate with, because I am somebody who comes from very, very modest and, let's be real, fucking broke financial backgrounds, whereas I grew up in a location and am primarily friends with people who are all much more well off than I am financial wise, and with their family like wealth backgrounds. Especially like the town that I grew up in and went to high school in is considered to be a very, very wealthy town. So I interacted with a ton of fucking arrogant pricks just because like mommy and daddy had money. So it is really, really interesting being able to read and see those kinds of dynamics on paper, because I feel like finances and money issues aren't really addressed in books so much, because generally, you know, young adult literature tends to revolve around teenagers or the like. But even if you are not the one who's like obviously in control of your family finances, like it definitely affects your life and how you're able to exist and interact with other things. So I really, really liked that they did discuss that aspect. And again, it also shows culture and ethnicity struggles being within like yourself against your own struggles, but also other people's issues with different cultures and, you know, different prejudices and things like that, which I thought were fairly well done in a way. Like it obviously showed, you know, different people, more specifically like other white people and characters interacting with the two main Indian characters and their cultural backgrounds. Some of them, like, obviously were fine, had no issue, but then some of them, you know, were definitely more prejudiced, or at the very least, like, more judgmental. But it wasn't, like, it didn't feel uncomfortable to read, because I feel like more often than not, when I see other books try and tackle issues like this, they make it more uncomfortable and poorly done conversations, whereas this felt, you know, it wasn't so bad and negative that it was uncomfortable to read, but it also made its point of, you know, showing how it is more of a regular and daily thing that people of different cultures are faced with. For the book itself, overall, I thought that it was fairly well written, and the time blocking of it was really, really good for the most part. The book follows like a whole 3 weeks as is, almost for the day. Like it's not separated by days, but like you feel very actively present for like a whole 3 weeks of the book. And then towards the end, it does like a 3-week time jump that I thought was more of a mistake, honestly. It felt very out of nowhere and very rushed. Like it was just like a means to an end to get towards the end of the book, instead of taking more of the time and making the book a little bit longer, being able to extend the time and like explore those 3 weeks, especially because a lot of what happens in the final like last couple of chapters of the book involve feelings and thoughts that were had during that 3-week time jump that we don't get to see until they're mentioned as afterthoughts. And compared to the first, you know, 2/3 of the book, I thought that it was a very drastic difference from being able to actively be a part of everything that's going on to then hearing like, oh, this happened, or like this was a consideration or a thought that was had. I'll be honest, felt a little bit lazy. And then there is one major, like, for all of the praise I have for the book, and as much as I do like the book, I do have one major issue that I did want to address, and that is that throughout like their friendship and relationship and just like interacting with each other, Dimple has a very frequent habit of hitting Rishi, and it's meant to be playful, but when it gets to a point where like when something happens, when Rishi's first thought is to like flinch because he's expecting her to like smack him, that's when it starts to cross over into the problematic and potentially abusive territories. They definitely treat it as like, oh, it's a cute little quirky thing, but like that's a really, really toxic mindset to have. And I know that that's very common and normalized, especially in like American culture. You know, that's just very, very damaging, because like, even if it is playful or not meant out of anger or with the intention of hurting the other person, physical reactions like hitting, slapping, smacking, punching, like should not be normalized and should not be accepted, because like, even if it's not done to be painful, like it's still, like that's not good for anybody involved and has a very, very slippery slope of turning into a much worse situation. So I just really, really wanted to address that, because that was like my main concern with their relationship and with Dimple, is that she very, very often had the like reaction to like hit him. And I'm just not a fan, and that's definitely not something that I want to encourage or endorse, because that is very, very, very toxic behavior. If your personality and your type of interaction is a little bit more of the roughhousey type, and if that's how you are with like siblings or friends, where it's, you know, more playful smacking around, but specifically to be playful and everybody involved is like expecting it and okay with it, like that's a different scenario than it being a kind of emotional response that's unexpected on the other party's part, or is like anticipated with having like a flinch as a reaction. Like that's not okay. So there are definitely very, very important distinctions between those types of physical interactions as well. I would be a hypocrite to say that I've never like playfully smacked anybody, because I absolutely have, but there's very much a time and a place. And also, the older and more mature that I get, the less that I do that, because it's just not appropriate and it's not very, very healthy. Other than that one major criticism that I had, overall, I do think that the book was fairly cute. Yeah, there were definitely some unrealistic scenarios that happened within the book, but not so far outside the realm of believability. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.